So let's talk a little bit here about AEW and FTR. FTR, Dash and Dawson now, well, obviously they're not Dash and Dawson anymore, but they made their debut on Dynamite last week. They had their first sit-down this past week, sit-down interview on TV with Tony Schiavone, who was interviewing them in a building lobby somewhere. And I thought it was good in that they at least established why they're here. They established the issues, that they have with other teams being called the greatest in the world and teasing out the issue with them and the Bucks. But they also gave a much more interesting interview than the one on TV to Jim Cornette, who is a favorite of theirs and Cornette is a favorite of them. Mutual admiration society between the two sides. Cornette had FTR on his podcast this past week. If you heard the interview that they gave on Talk is Jericho, not much in the way of new information, really, as far as their unhappiness in WWE and getting their release. I mean, there was a lot of overlap there, but they told the story of Triple H agreeing at one point to grant them their release when they first asked for their release. He's like, all right, if you guys want your release, I'll give you your release. And then the very next day, he turned around and said, I'm not going to give you your release because he had time to think about it, and I think you guys have a lot to contribute. And so they did not initially get their release. But Scott Dawson, again, I guess I still call him Scott Dawson. I'm not used to Dax Harwood yet, so I'm still going to call him Scott Dawson. He did tell one story when Cornette asked what the percentages of guys who study old tape and such, students of the game, right? Students of history. How many people in the company do that sort of thing? He told a story about walking one day into the PC, and they had brought in Ricky Morton. They brought Ricky Morton in, I guess, as a guest trainer, and how he found Ricky Morton, one of the greatest tag team wrestlers, tag team specialists of all time, over by one of the rings in the PC, all by himself. Not one person around him, not one person approaching him, not one person asking him questions. Nobody around him. And he got hot about it. He was angry. He was upset. Dawson walked into the office where Matt Bloom was, the head trainer, and he's like, what the fuck? He was beside himself. And he said Bloom agreed, and he couldn't believe it. And he told Dawson, he goes, hey, if you want to say something, the floor is yours. And so he called a meeting of all the talent in the Performance Center, and Dawson says he just laced into them. He laced into them, he got all emotional and started crying, and he was giving this impassioned speech to all of these wrestlers. He goes, you have Ricky effing Morton standing right there. There were guys at the time who were in the middle of a tag team class. He goes, you're in tag team class? You've got one of the greatest tag team wrestlers of all time standing there basically with his thumb up his ass. And nobody is asking him questions. Nobody's picking his brain. Nobody's talking to him. And he said, he'll bet that a lot of people who were in the PC that day never even watched a Ricky Morton match. They probably never even knew who he was. They had no idea who the man was. And that was kind of a telling story. But the bigger news coming out of this interview were their comments about the Young Bucks and their, heat with them and their heat with Cody over comments that Cody made on a podcast a few years ago with Sam Roberts. Now, let me just say, I can believe that the Cody comments did bother them. I can believe the Cody comments at the time did rub them the wrong way, but I don't believe there was any heat with the Young Bucks. I think, they did a very good job in this interview with Cornette of blending reality with fiction. They were working their asses off during this interview, and they were very convincing. They were very convincing in trying to make people believe that they might shoot on the Young Bucks when they finally do meet in the ring, and that we haven't signed any contract yet with Tony Khan. We're working off a short-term handshake agreement. I don't buy that for a second. But it does make for a good story. So when I talk about these comments, you got to think about them in that context. You might believe them, you might not believe them. You got to take them with a grain of salt when you listen to them. But they said that their issue with Cody was with him telling Sam Roberts that the Revival, I guess Sam Roberts must have asked him, hey, between the Revival and the Young Bucks, who do you think is the greatest tag team in the world today? And Cody at the time said that he felt the Bucks were the best tag team in the world, 100%, which, you would expect him to say for obvious reasons. But he said for the Revival, and this is what got the Revival supposedly upset, he made comments to the effect, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he said that the Revival, who were having great matches at the time in NXT. I mean, they were having great matches with American Alpha and I think Gargano and Ciampa. I mean, they were on a roll in NXT and those big takeover matches. And Cody said, these guys know, I would hope they're going out there and having great matches because these guys know a month in advance who they're going to be wrestling, and they go out and they practice their match. They have a month to go out and practice their match at the Performance Center. Whereas the Young Bucks may sometimes get to a show and they may find out 2 hours beforehand, who they're going to wrestle, and they're going to go out there and still tear it up. And FTR found this offensive because never in their lives, Dawson said, have they practiced a wrestling match. And they were very offended when they heard that. And that I can believe. I can believe that did bother them. Now they're just sort of playing it up. But that I can believe, because that is kind of a shitty thing to say if you think about it. And Cornette went off on it too. He kind of cut a promo of his own. I can see that as being viewed as disrespectful, kind of a shitty thing to say. Their heat with the Bucks, they claim, stems from the fact that in 2016, when they started doing the whole, fuck the Revival stuff and name dropping them, they were working their own angle. Basically, that they were working their own angle. They never told FTR. They never got their consent, or they never asked for their permission. Oh, hey guys, listen, we're gonna do this, and we're gonna get the marks talking and all this stuff. Like, none of that. They just went and did it, and they found that very disrespectful. And so they teased in this interview here that when they finally do get into the ring with the Bucks, and that they've already told Tony Khan this, like, there's no telling what might happen here. They were teasing that it might be a little more snug. They might shoot on them. Basically, is what they were saying. And they claim that not only did they tell this to Tony Khan, but that Khan liked the idea. He said, oh, that'd be great. They claim they have no contract. They're still negotiating on a deal. They may wind up signing one, but they don't currently have one. That I don't buy. But they are very convincing when they talk about this stuff, like the heat with the Bucks. It is a smart way to build heat for the eventual match. Think about the audience that AEW caters to. It is a lot of these so-called, smart fans and fans who are into a certain style. And so for them, it's smart to let these guys go on. Just the fact that they went on Cornette's podcast, I'm sure is going to rub a lot of people in that company, including the Bucks, the wrong way. And other people that Cornette has insulted viciously on his podcast. And I'm not just talking about, Kenny Olivier, and, we all know his thoughts on Kenny Omega and, Balding Buck and Road Warrior Buck, I think he calls him. I can never figure out which is which, like who's supposed to be Balding Buck and who's Road Warrior Buck. But, Cornette, he does review AEW, I guess, on his podcast. I know he reviewed the whole Stadium Stampede thing and tore it to shreds. And I don't doubt that he is, in a way, playing it up, but that he also genuinely doesn't like that style of wrestling. And so he constantly is shitting on the product and shitting on some of and saying very, in some cases, ridiculously offensive things about some of the talents on the roster. And so I can't imagine even these guys getting all buddy on his podcast, makes them very happy. But look, there's not, if they want to go on the podcast and talk to Cornette, that's their prerogative. They have the right to do that. But this kind of leads into the next idea, which is the idea of Cornette possibly doing something with AEW or being brought in even just for a match as a manager for FTR, which they did address that as well. But just to go back for a second to the whole Bucks FTR thing and my belief that it is smart to kind of build it up this way. I think it is smart. They also have to be careful. This is not, and the Bucks do the whole being the elite thing, and there's a lot of funny skits and stuff, and FTR skywriting in the sky and stuff, and a lot of it is played up for laughs, and a lot of it is played up for comedy. I don't think that this is a program. I don't think that this is a feud that should be played up for jokes at all. I think you got to leave the funny stuff out of this. No special effects, no dream sequences like we got with Matt versus Nick, right, in their match on Being the Elite 200. You got to leave that shit at the door. If you want people to really buy into this as something real, you want people to buy into the idea, oh, there's real heat here. We might shoot. all of this stuff, all the funny haha bullshit has to be kept out of this. So that's one of the things, in my opinion, that they have to do. You want to play it up as legit, make the shot stiff, make it feel like a real fight between these two teams, like they really have something to prove as far as who the best tag team in the world is. But there was definitely a blend of reality and fiction going on in this interview. And they did at the very end, again, tease the idea that maybe Cornette, hey, you know what would be, and FTR would love for Cornette to manage them. And they're the ones who brought up the idea. They said, you know, it would be even better if we had you in our corner, you know, for our matches. And Cornette joked. He said, well, you know, if they come close by, if they're between like this state and this state, you know, he basically was insinuating that he would be open to it. He would be open to the idea. That too will never happen. It is just, no way. No way would AEW, I think, even entertain the idea of that happening. And it really is just not worth the potential damage that it would cause with their own talent. I mean, forget the fans. With their own talent. There are talent that work in that company who have been attacked verbally by Jim Cornette, and maybe others who haven't been, but who have heard some of the things that he has said about some of the people who work in the company, whether it be a Marco Stunt or a Nyla Rose or a Sonny Kiss or whoever. And I just think that it would be a real issue for Tony Khan in terms of the trust of the locker room and the people who work for him, if it ever was to get to that point where they actually brought Cornette into that locker room, even just one time. I'm not going to tell you that it wouldn't be entertaining. I'm not going to tell you that I think it wouldn't get tremendous heat. As a promoter, it's the sort of thing you kind of salivate over, the idea of it. But I just think that the things that he has said and continues to say and everything, unless you believe that everything he says is bullshit and you don't believe a word he says, and I do think he actually has that level of hatred for the product. He just does not like the product. And some of the people who work for that company, I just think you're inviting way too much trouble than you need to have if you're Tony Khan by even entertaining the idea of bringing Jim Cornette in for any kind of angle or match in this company. So it's nice to talk about, but no, I don't see that happening. I'm sure the Revival would love it, but I don't see that happening. But as far as the FTR Bucks feud, like I said, smart way to build it up, but keep the funny stuff and the skits and all of that. Keep it out. You really want people to believe that this is quote unquote real, that this stems from real heat and you don't know what's going to happen? You got to keep the funny stuff out of it. You got to keep all that stuff, you know, the Matt Hardy type stuff, the drones and the teleportation and all that has to be kept out. And just let these two teams go at it, because this is a match that people have been talking about for a very long time. People throw around the dream match label. You know, to me, I don't really have any realistic dream matches anymore. Maybe at one time, you know, guys have retired since then and stuff. I can't say that I have what's my dream match. My dream matches involve matches that literally cannot happen anymore. You know, Kurt Angle against Bret Hart, that's a dream match. Bret Hart and Owen Hart against Kurt Angle and Chris Benoit at one time. That would have been a dream match. These are matches that simply are not possible anymore. Realistically, I can't think of any that I have, but look, I think the Bucks and FTR, because it has been built up for so many years, and I'm sure these two teams have been dying to work with each other, I think when they finally meet, you know, it might be better than even the Kenny Omega Hangman Page match that they had with the Bucks, which a lot of people think is one of the all-time great tag team matches. It was an excellent match, you know, that we saw at Revolution. And this has the potential to top even that, you know, and I hope when the time comes, they go out there and they tear the house down. And it would be nice if they had fans in the building when they did it. I wouldn't do the match anytime before All Out, the first match. Keep the comedy out. Play it up as real. That's the way to go.